Time's Up Legal Defense Fund was created to help survivors of workplace sexual harassment. And this week, it's turning its attention to Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Time's Up has called on Kavanaugh to withdraw from consideration after multiple women accused him of sexual assault. It staged a national walkout, encouraging women to leave work to express support for his accusers. We recently sat down with the Legal Fund's co-founder Tina Tchen to ask her about Kavanaugh and the news cycle through the Time's Up lens.
I do feel like there's the face of Time's Up is all of these very famous people. Do you think that that's intimidating at all for the people that you're really trying to reach out to in this?
Actually, I think the fact that it's been entertainment and famous faces has helped. People have asked me a lot, why is this different now than it was 27 years ago, for example, when Anita Hill testified. Well, it's not like we haven't dealt with sexual harassment as a national conversation previously, but it's never taken off this way. And what I think is different right now is partially because it started in Hollywood. I mean, we all think we know Ashley Judd and we're friends with her, or Reese Witherspoon. They're in our, televisions, in our kitchens every day. And in our celebrity-driven culture, we feel like we know them. And I think it resonated differently. As eloquent and incredibly brave as Anita Hill was 27 years ago, people didn't know who she was, and couldn't understand the workplace she was in, didn't really understand it. And then secondly, it's a social media time. If this had happened to you 27 years ago and you watched Anita Hill, what would you do? You would tell 10 friends. That's as far as it would go. With the Me Too movement that Tarana Burke started, now there's a way you post something on #MeToo and tens of millions of people will see it right away. And so that has created a velocity to these issues that I don't think we've ever seen before.
Let's go back to the national conversation. So we have Kavanaugh confirmation, and then we have Les Moonves, CBS severance, which are both two issues that Time's Up has put out letters with specific actions that they'd like to see from that. Tell me about what the overarching goal is in watching the larger news cycle and kind of putting out these letters from the Time's Up perspective.
Well, Time's Up has really been trying to focus on the big structural issues that underlie these individual stories. So in the case of CBS, the letter that Time's Up put out, called for, not just increasing the amount of money that would be contributed, but more importantly, called upon CBS to actually do structural reforms and a list of things that we hoped that they would do, to really elevate, for example, sexual harassment, so that it was something that the board and the CEO and the leadership of the organization took seriously on an ongoing, regular basis, not just in a moment of crisis. In the case of the Kavanaugh nomination, I'm glad to see now that there is going to be a full hearing. Unfortunately, I'm disappointed to see that there's not going to be a full investigation as there normally would be for any fact involving a Supreme Court nominee. But at least there's going to be a hearing under oath where Dr. Ford, will testify, where Judge Kavanaugh will testify. It is important, what Me Too has been all about is for women to be believed. Really for centuries, women who have been victimized, most often the response is, we don't believe them. And that's a real core, bedrock piece of what needs to happen right now. And I think we've seen happening over the last year is that women, instead of being dismissed, are being believed and being heard.
A lot of people, I think, criticize Me Too for two purposes, like not being inclusive enough and then not having substantial action. Would you say that Time's Up is kind of the component that encompasses those two issues?
Yeah, I think you have to understand, Me Too, really, Tarana, a woman of color, is the person who started Me Too. And so I think, it certainly Tarana's intent has been to be fully inclusive. This is, harassment is something, and sexual violence is something that happens to men as well as women. It happens to people based on their sexual orientation, on their gender identity. It happens to disabled people, and we need to combat all forms of harassment and violence that occurs and give people an outlet to speak out and be believed and be heard on doing that. That's what Me Too, that's the real power of Me Too, is that it has given voice to that. And that's step one. You can't solve a problem you can't name and see. So naming and seeing and having people come forward to identify the issue that exists has been the critical first component in people even realizing there was a problem. My guess is before a year ago, people have been doing sexual harassment training for 3 decades. Most people thought, I got a policy, I got training. we don't have any reports in our system, we don't have a problem. When in fact now we know that the training isn't sufficient, the law isn't sufficient. It doesn't cover nearly enough. It doesn't cover the people who are like independent contractors. It doesn't cover behavior that's, for example, not sex-based or race-based harassment. So that hasn't been sufficient. And people haven't come forward because of the fear of retaliation, because the systems haven't been secure enough. So now we know that so Time's Up really is the companion to call for change. What can we do differently? What can companies do differently? What can institutions like the U.S. Congress do differently to address these issues?